Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to this panel discussion on frontline reporting in the Pacific Islands. I'm Andrew Griffiths. I'm the Head of Media and Communications here at the Lowy Institute. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to welcome any First Nations people joining us here this evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to tonight's important discussion about on-the-ground reporting in the Pacific at a time of rapid political and security change. The Pacific is at the centre of some of the most significant geopolitical shifts of our time. As major powers compete for influence, Pacific nations are navigating an increasingly complex web of diplomatic, economic and security challenges. Equally, they contend with urgent domestic pressures on law and order, public health and climate change. Over the past few years, we've seen how quickly world events can reshape this region. Security partnerships have been signed and debated, governments have changed, and strategic alignments have been tested and altered. At the same time, Pacific nations continue to assert their own agency, advocating for regional priorities on the global stage and making choices that best serve their people. Amid all of this, high-quality journalism has never been more vital. The stories that local reporters present about the Pacific and the voices that they centre in those stories shape how the region is understood both within its borders and beyond. And yet, the practice of journalism in the Pacific remains challenging. Dis and misinformation are proliferating in many Pacific states, and yet regulatory efforts to curtail these issues have at times been counterproductive for journalists seeking to hold governments to account. Newsroom modernisation is desperately in need in many countries, as is effective training to use new digital technologies like AI. And media freedom continues to be tested as Pacific journalists grapple with limits on their ability to hold the powerful to account. Overcoming formal and informal censorship, including self-censorship, threats of defamation action, and the removal of legislative protections for journalists are all major challenges for the profession. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome an excellent panel of Pacific correspondents who navigate these issues daily. Our panellists are part of the ABC's Pacific Local Journalism Network, and their work on the ground provides critical insights into the realities shaping the region today. Through their reporting, they've documented political transitions, rising security concerns, and the impacts of climate change, witnessed firsthand. They've spoken to political leaders, communities, and those at the heart of these changes, bringing us a deeper, more nuanced understanding of what's happening in Fiji, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, and neighbouring Pacific Islands nations. Finally, we hope tonight's event will be a chance for you to connect with your Australian colleagues and other journalists from across the Pacific. So please join us for some drinks and some nibbles at the end of our discussion tonight. I also invite you to come and chat with me and my Lowy Institute colleagues who are here in the room tonight to find out more about how our research and our resources might be useful to your work. But now, to introduce our panellists and to tell you a little bit more about tonight's discussion, I'd like to welcome Nick Sass, the executive producer of the ABC's Pacific Local Journalism Network, to say a few words. Thank you and welcome, Nick.
Thanks, Andrew. It's amazing to see so many people here. I was ecstatic to see that it was basically a sellout and it's standing room only, so welcome everyone. As Andrew said, I'm Nick Sass, the executive producer of the Pacific Local Journalism Network. And I just wanted to give some context about why we exist and our wonderful team exists in the ABC. So I guess the Pacific Local Journalism Network started as an idea or a wish list idea from my boss, the head of the Asia Pacific newsroom, about 5 years ago. And then it turned into reality when we were able to get some funding through the DFAT's Indo-Pacific broadcasting strategy. 2 years ago, the first people to join the network were our wonderful Fiji reporter, Lice, who you hear from, and Chrisnrita Aumanu-Leong from Solomon Islands. They joined the team, and then we were able to grow to a wonderful team of 7 now. So we have 7 journalists across the region from Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea. I always forget one. Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Fiji, Tonga, Samoa, Vanuatu. So I got it, yes. All 7. So the team are what we call an ABC Land multi-platform. So I think there's a lot of journalist students in the room. So journalism these days, you have to do everything. So they're VJs, we call video journalists. They're radio journalists. They're doing social media. They're doing stuff for the ABC digital website. They're doing traditional TV. So they do everything. We've had stories on 7:30 program. We've had current affairs, on our flagship current affairs program, AM. We've had hundreds of live crosses to our news channel. And then we've also had online stories that have reached huge audience, like millions, but like single stories that have reached more than 600,000 people. The unique aspect of the team is they're half focused on the Pacific and half focused on our traditional kind of ABC audience. So focus on the Pacific through Pacific Beat, our flagship radio program, and obviously the Pacific, which some of you might have seen, our TV show. And then obviously just ABC platforms, the huge reach the ABC has across Australia and the world. But I guess the core idea of the network, and you'll hear a lot of this today, is to, I guess, put an end to the idea of like parachute journalism that we've had in the past few decades, where stories were told on the behalf of Pacific Islanders, and now we get journalists here a chance to tell their own stories with nuance and context to reflect the communities that they serve and live in. So it's really changed the way that Pacific stories are told within Australia. And from what we gather from our audience, they absolutely love it. And the most simple way that I put it is it's stories for the region, from the region. So, and with that, I'm going to stop talking and invite our panel up to the stage. So come up, guys. And I'll introduce you when you're up.
We're fighting to decide who doesn't sit in the middle.
That's fine.
Oops. We have Solomon Islands reporter Chrisnrita Aumanu-Leong. We have Tonga reporter Marian Kupu. We have Papua New Guinea reporter Belinda Kora, and our Fiji reporter Lice Movono. And I'll let Mihai introduce himself. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick and Andrew, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this evening. What a crowd. Good evening. My name is Mihai Sora. I'm the director of the Pacific Islands program here at the Lowy Institute, and it's an absolute pleasure to be joined on the stage here by these excellent reporters. Now, as Andrew said, the Pacific is often portrayed as a region caught in geopolitical currents, navigating complex challenges ranging from climate change and transnational crime to security tensions among major powers. It is a region often talked about from the outside. So tonight we'll be hearing from reporters from the inside, people who report daily as ABC correspondents from their home countries, to help us understand how these global forces shape local stories, regional dynamics, and vice versa. Now, Lice, I'd like to start with you. And on behalf of the other panelists, thank you very much for being brave enough to take the first question, breaking that ice for all of us.
I had a choice.
I think there's a special prize after this. So we'll start with a nice, easy question. Prime Minister Rambuka has said previously that the Pacific is facing a polycrisis, a combination of pressures from transnational crime, climate change, global security tensions, increasing cyber risks, mounting health system pressures, the list goes on. But how are these issues manifesting in Fiji?
Thank you, Miha. And I, first of all, want to say thank you so much. We did not expect such a full room, and now we're just more nervous, so thank you. But heading on to Prime Minister Sitiveni Rambuka, he is quite an articulate leader, I'll say that. And when he says polycrisis, he really means that all of the challenges we go through in Fiji, climate change, transnational crime, our health system stress, the geostrategic pressure that we're constantly under and have been for years. And these are challenges that are not specific to Fiji. A lot of them are quite common across the Pacific, that they're not working in isolation, that each of them come at any given time, they interact with each other, and they compound the impact as individual challenges, and even more so when they're all coming all at once. And sometimes it feels that way, and I'd like to refer to the climate crisis, for example. When we're talking about climate change in Fiji, we're not just talking about, those stereotypical images that you'll see in a lot of the traditional media coverage, saltwater inundation, coastal erosion, that sort of thing. Now it's also a national security issue. Now it's something we're talking about as military, as public policy people, as journalists on a daily basis, because now people are displaced. People don't have access to resources. There is a danger element for women and children, for example, and all of this has an impact on our ability to take care of the other challenges that we're looking after. So it becomes a public finance issue as well. And all of that against the backdrop of, for example, the ongoing geopolitical competition for territory and for influence in the Pacific, because the decisions that we're making about what should be an environmental issue is not just that anymore. Who you take help from, who you accept help from, is now about what it looks like in terms of our foreign relations. It's now about who we're aligned to, and that's something we don't want to be doing. And so when we're talking about transnational crime, it's not just about what the police are doing, what we're doing at our borders in order that we're keeping safe. Because now the drugs, which is the most prominent product of transnational crime, it's, if you've been paying attention to our coverage, it's leading to what is, at our last count, a ninefold increase in HIV positive cases in 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. And now that has an added pressure on a public health infrastructure that already does not know how to deal with HIV as a health issue, as a mental health issue. So everything is compounded. What we decide in terms of how we address the biggest challenges of our country and the region, it has an impact on each other, and it's making public policy very difficult. But from what the people we interview on a daily basis tell us, it has an impact on everything we're doing across the board and across the sectors. So when he says this is a polycrisis, it's not just a theory or political rhetoric. It's the very real and lived experiences that the people are telling us about through the stories we get to tell you.
I want to stay on the transnational crime issue, and I'll go to Marian next. Now, you've done some amazing reporting on that issue. In particular, I'm thinking of a story, Pacific Drug Highway, that you've done with colleagues Adele Fruin and Nick Sass. Now, can you tell us a bit what you discovered, and also maybe reflect on, in a small country like Tonga, how you balance your role as an objective journalist, but also a member of that community as well?
Thank you. I did literally ask Lice to go longer. I tell you, that's not long. So going back on my reporting, I have to comment, if you have followed through on the story that we did on Pacific Drug Highway, which was a collective report between Fiji, Samoa, Fiji with Lice Movono, Samoa. We have Adele Fruin, and also myself in Tonga. There were different perspectives and angles that needed to be covered. Lice was reporting on a more from the authority side of things, coming from the police perspective and experiences with drug in Fiji. Adele was reporting on more like of a chiefly village community-based perspective, because in Samoa, the chiefly and ties between the communities and the authority is still very much intact. And apparently they gave me the hardest part, which is reporting from inside prison.
You were in prison.
So it wasn't hard for me, given that I was local, and because it was Tonga's very small, 104,000 people. Yes, I know it's at, I've been to PNG, it was like, Port Moresby was 10 times more than the population in Tonga. Everybody tends to know everyone. There's pros and cons to it. Having the authority grant access into the maximum prison in Tonga was a big highlight for myself because no one has ever reported from inside maximum prison. Police commissioner also allowed me to have, while he wrote the consent, and having ABC allow the interviewees or the criminals to be faced and named in the interview. But because I know the reaction from the government or from the public, because we're very small, they will definitely be stigmatized in coming from their families, the villages, even up to the 8th grandparents. That's how intact our culture is. So having said that, the pros and cons of reporting from a very small community in Tonga. The pros will be obviously getting access to everything and everyone. And the cons will be, if it comes to safety, I think we have no safety avenues because everybody knows everyone, where you live, your name, your parents, your phone number even. So that's the cons that, that I have to face when reporting on very sensitive topics like this. But having said that, if you ask me if I was frightened or scared for my life and my security, I'll say no, because I'm local. And that's the benefit of reporting from your own backyard. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, moving to Papua New Guinea now. Belinda, last week the government shut down Facebook without notice for a couple of days, which caused a lot of confusion even within government ranks, it seems. Businesses, in particular small to medium enterprises that use Facebook to trade, were also affected. Government programs that use Facebook to deliver information and services were affected. Now, could you walk us through what happened that week? Just give us a sense of the community response to that government action, the motivation behind it.
Thank you for a very long question.
I made it shorter, actually.
Okay, you must appreciate that it's not the first time that the government has actually said that it was going to shut down Facebook. We've had, several ministers, prime ministers who have attempted to do so due to misinformation, disinformation, inciting violence since 2019. But when it did shut down, no one expected it. Just like water and electricity, living in the country, working as a journalist, being on all social media, when it happened, no one was warned about it. And so that made it very difficult for me to report about it because I'm on Facebook and I needed to know if it was, online or not. So when I was given the opportunity to cover the story on behalf of Pacific Beat here, I realized that a lot of people who were online couldn't express themselves. And so they went into WhatsApp, Instagram, and so the movement of people moving to those avenues gave me the opportunity to find out what was happening and all that. Getting answers from authorities, I never got those answers from NICTA or from communication and technology authorities in the country, including the ministers themselves. So apparently, as the days and the hours went by, we finally got a press statement from the police minister, which came out and was contradicting all the other statements that came out from the communication and the technology division. And so that prompted a lot of people in the public to start questioning the trust in authority itself. And so what made it more difficult for me to report about the mainstream media was that that also questioned us and our ability to even report about these issues. And so as that happened, and as we headed into the second day of not being online, and then finally not even getting any answers even from those who were supposed to give us answers from the PM's media unit, and of course the Prime Minister's office, it came back online. And as a journalist, you question that. Did it solve anything if it did come back online? And so that's my follow-up when I go back to the office.
Okay. I'll stay with you because you've warmed up now. You've got such momentum. You're welcome.
No, go to the next question.
Could you just reflect a little bit on the pressures on journalists in Papua New Guinea, whether it's through new media laws and regulations or other government actions? You know, people have been referring to attempts by the government to limit the spread of information, and it seems to be affecting the journalist sector there as well. Could you reflect on that?
Okay, so the local journalist, yes, and I should say, working as an ABC reporter on ground, it's more looking outside. I mean, looking in to local media, which I was part of before. And so, yes, we had the National Media Development Policy, I think you've heard about, that is now approved by the National Executive Council. And what has been the biggest stronghold against this was the Media Council of the country itself, representing all 16 local media houses that have now agreed to work along with government, but then ensuring that the influence is not is not given into the space of the Media Council itself. But if there's anything to do with funding and all that, it's now going to be driven towards the institutions of journalism that need that money to improve their quality of learning. And so for the mainstream media, I should say, yes, the pressure is on. Most of it is government-owned. Most of the local mainstream media is owned by government. And so, yes, I will not deny that there is pressure within the newsroom to ensure that you keep operating and that your license is not a threat. And so that's how it's driven into the newsroom when it's not supposed to, where we've had occasions in the past couple of years where editors are put under a lot of pressure to make sure that they're running news that is not offensive or found to be offensive against what government service is actually, what government is actually doing. But I should say that over the years, the editors themselves have come together through a very more well-constructed media council that has gone against 5 drafts of the media policy of the country. And so the government has seen that, yes, the media is speaking as one voice. And so that has enabled newsrooms to try to move away from that scenario and try to be able to protect itself and its rights to continue to hold government accountable.
Terrific, thank you. Now, Chrissy, I know that you really want a question, so here is one for you. Solomon Islands captured international attention in 2022 when the government there signed a security pact and a policing agreement with China. It's one of the few countries in the Pacific where China trains local police forces. And over the last few years, it has become the focal point of much of this geopolitical rivalry that we've been referring to between China and traditional security partners such as Australia, the United States. But what do Solomon Islanders make of all of this international attention? And is there a clear direction, you think, in the community that people want to see their country take in foreign relations?
Thank you for that. Look, what are the odds that the first ever panelist you get thrown into is this? Feeling very great that this is my first, but also very thankful for the opportunity. If I can just get a show of hands of how many out there have been to Solomon Islands? Ooh, I feel like my home is here now. But for those of you who may not have a clue where Solomon Islands is, it's a country of around 800,000 people. 1,000 islands scattered across. 98% is ocean, 2% land, and 70 different languages. So it's quite diverse already. And in the Pacific, it stands as one of the lowest internet penetration in terms of accessing information, which makes our job a little bit more difficult than others. So it's geographically challenged, and some discrepancies highlight the challenge to access media and information. So in saying that, I worked as a freelancer first, and I wasn't able to travel out to the other provinces. So I'm based in the capital of Honiara, and it was through the ABC that I was able to travel out to the remote areas to be able to gauge what Solomon Islanders felt or thought about all the international headlines or things that were making headlines out there from their comfort of their homes. And being able to do that, from the people that I've spoken to, they feel that the whole international headlines and all the attention that was on Solomon Islands diverted the attention of the government and from the real issues that were affecting the people, issues that mattered to the people of Solomon Islands. And in saying that as well, when I went out and spoke to Solomon Islanders, I asked them the very question, what do you think about Chinese aid, Australian aid? And they were very grateful, as many Pacific Islanders are, very grateful. But at the same time, they said to me, when I said, what springs to mind when you think of Chinese aid? And they say, National Stadium. Because yes, for so long, we do not have a national stadium, and that's a gift from China. And so people have resonated to that because seeing is believing. That's what they believe in what they see. And at the same time, when I talk to people, they say, oh, you're talking about Chinese influence. What Chinese influence? Chinese people have been around in Solomon Islands for as early as in the 1900s. My husband, I hope he's not listening, but he's third generation of a Chinese national as well. And so we have been living with Chinese nationals, and they've been part of us also. So being able to hear from the people, so there's a little bit of mixed opinions. So yes, they also are concerns about sovereignty and some other issues, but for many Solomon Islanders, they're more worried about how the government will approach the problems that are mostly domestic issues. So say unemployment is one of that. In our population, more than 70% are young people. And so what's the government's commitment towards young people? People want to see better schools, education in the education sector. People want to see the very basic. They want running water in their homes. That's the security that they crave for. That's the security that they want to see. They want to see the high cost of electricity. We don't have the bragging rights, but the high cost of electricity to be improved, better improved, and that the government do not sidetrack their concerns just because of this whole security and geopolitical tussle that's there. And these are the opinions that people say, and everyday people that we speak to generally, most people want to see balanced relations. A country like Solomon Islands is a country that's heavily dependent on aid, and so because we depend on aid, we see ourselves as, at the same time we are dependent on aid, and so the government has this stand that, friends to all, enemies to none, but at the same time, it's just important that the role of journalists and myself and other journalists are there to ensure that there's transparency, accountability in these positions as well. So.
Yep. Thank you.
So that was a really hard question. I feel bad, and I'll give you a really easy one now.
The microphone.
Just laugh right into the mic. I'll ask you to reflect on Prime Minister Jeremiah Manelli. Now, Prime Minister Manelli has been in power for almost a year, and he's replaced the more gregarious politician.
I like how you were searching for a word.
Just cross out the one I had. Manasseh Sogavare, who himself was no stranger to global headlines. But what is the perception locally of Prime Minister Maneli's government after almost a year in power?
She's saying this should be a good one. But I guess Prime Minister Jeremiah Manele, as many would know, he's a seasoned diplomat. He has introduced a leadership style that is contrast to his predecessor, former Solomon's Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare. He's who some say is a bombastic in nature or a combative leader.
No, that's what you think.
But I was able to have a sit-in interview with Prime Minister Jeremiah Manele. One that the ABC have been able to do in the last 6 years. And it's important for us to be able to do that because I am on the ground, just as my other colleagues are. And it takes time to build that trust, to be able to gain the trust, because we are living the realities there. We know what we're talking about. We know what we're speaking about. So Prime Minister Jeremiah Manele, he appears to be very less confrontational. And the discussions that we had were around his government 6 months, almost a year into his leadership. But just 6 months into Prime Minister Jeremiah Manele's leadership, there was a motion of no confidence. But he did tell me that he has enjoyed the stability and the continuity of his government. And from what I understand, Solomon Islanders that I've spoken to have also realized that, oh, it's been a very quiet year. And so far, in terms of addressing domestic issues, people that I've interviewed feel that there's still a lot more that can be done when it comes to the issues that I mentioned in the questions earlier, which is unemployment. It's almost like I'm reading it off, but it's all in here. But unemployment, the youth bulge, accessing water, electricity, these challenges. But generally, people are happy that things are slowing down a bit, especially when it comes to international relations. They feel that Prime Minister Jeremiah Manele has sort of, diplomatically spoken to people or other countries that they didn't see happen before. Okay, so for Solomon Islanders, it's a country that's come post-conflict, and so right now, people say, what I understand, people say the last thing they want to see is division. At the same time, people want to see a government that's responsible, that is transparent, and wants what is best for the interests of Solomon Islands. And in our interview with Prime Minister Jeremiah Manele, we talked about security, where he says his government views security in a development lens, and that Solomon Islands needs more than one partner. And in fact, that brings to mind, there's a joke in Solomon Islands that's known about Honiara being the pothole capital. So ideally people I've talked to want to see the potholes being filled up, whether it'll be China, by Australia, by Saudi Arabia, by New Zealand, or whoever our development partners are. That is not, what they want to see is that their journey is smooth, be it which development partner. And that's where that's what people have been talking to me about.
Okay, moving back to Fiji now. Lice, Fiji often positions itself as somewhat of a hub in the Pacific, something of a regional leader. It's the host to the Pacific Islands Forum and several other agencies that have carriage over regional issues. Prime Minister Rambuka, aside from the polycrisis narrative, he's also said that he wants for the Pacific to be an ocean of peace. Now, what do you think he means by this? And how does it fit with his government's balancing act between all of the larger powers that have an interest in Fiji?
I think it's really important to note that it was almost immediately after taking office again that he introduced this concept of the ocean of peace. And when he did, some of the most immediate reaction from the people was almost that it was comical. People didn't really know what to expect of this and what it meant, and whether it was just another one of his expressions, because, as I said before, the man is quite articulate. But as it went on, he actually put some structure in place. He had a fancy launch down in Canberra. How is that? Upstate, yeah, in Canberra. There's a lot of conversation around it. There's seminars and public lectures, and then you get to really understand the heart of what he's saying. And from the people that I've spoken to, it sounds as if he's saying, and this is pretty much almost exactly what my friend Chrissy has said. We are friends to all, enemies to none, but you just can't keep saying that all over again. So it's about removing military pressure. It's about avoiding coercive influence, which is something that he's not alone in. In the public, when he says these things, the comments that we see coming onto the social media platforms that carry our stories echo his sentiments. It's about not wanting to see and I take my time to say this, our friends in our oceans all of the time, fighting for space in those oceans and in the ports and infrastructures and in our public offices and with our prime ministers. It's about saying to everyone, we don't want a region of alignment, and that our foreign policy and our political relationships should not ask of us alignment, but it should be one that's united around peace. And it's very easy to, when you look at how beautiful our large ocean states are, to be lost in the romanticized version of the Pacific and the romantic, beautiful places that we come from. And that's not a plug to the travel destination that we are. But it's to also say that while we smile at you and welcome you, either to our beautiful places or to where the decisions about public policy is being made, while we're smiling at you, we're hoping that you respect our wish to be a region of peace. That's what they're saying. That's what the people are saying. That just like my friend Chrissy said, we love that you want to offer to build our ports and our schools and our power stations and other critical infrastructure, but don't hold us to ransom over those things. We love that you want us to partner with you at United Nations votes and other powerhouses around the world, but don't hold us to ransom in these things, because a lot of what our challenges are need to be addressed as a region, and we need to do that at peace. And I must state that when we're talking to other Pacific leaders, and we do, often we're covering the other countries, and our colleagues over at the Asia Pacific Newsroom in Melbourne are doing the same, we hear different alliances. We're one region, but we're not all the same, and we have different priorities that come with those challenges. But the one thing we're united in is that we don't have the firepower to be anything other than peaceful. I think that's what he means.
Thank you for clarifying. Staying at that regional level, Marian, last year in August, Tonga hosted the Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting. It was the largest gathering yet, drawing around 1,000 delegates, dialogue partners like the US and China, observers, hangers-on, all amid heightened, sharpened, if you will, geopolitical tensions. And there were some big stories to come from that week, including a region-wide Pacific policing initiative, but also some confusion, particularly on the part of the senior Chinese representative present, about whether Pacific leaders could refer to Taiwan in their own leaders' statement. Now, you were there reporting from the ground. Could you give us a sense of the atmosphere, of the vibe of that week when the world came to visit Nuku'alofa?
This is smiling. I think he's itching to answer that one.
He's not on the panel.
But yes, talking about the vibe, in Tonga, we're known for receiving guests in the top, I can say, in the Pacific, because we're the only remaining monarchy in the Pacific, in the region. So we are born knowing what to do when we receive guests. It was a national unity of with communities and schools welcoming a delegation to Tonga. If you were one of the delegation, you would have walked the red carpet from the airport, greeted by our traditional Tongan dances and our police band. We need more policemen, but yet they were entertaining the delegation as they arrived in Tonga. The communities were all given roles from entertaining the wives of the leaders to showcasing climate change challenges to even coming down to all the logistic with catering and just providing for the delegation. So it was a big vibe, a whole nation coming together. We haven't had that a large number of delegation at one time in Tonga for a very long time. And the last forum before last year was in 2007. So there is a big change of numbers coming into our shores, and especially these were leaders. Having said that, we were also proud to have Tonga as chair for the Pacific Island Leaders Forum. So we wanted to mark our stance in the Pacific as chair and also as host. So that was a big vibe in Tonga during the forum. And they did it furthermore in taking the Pacific leaders to Vava'u, which is another tourist whale attraction island in Tonga. And I was even told that some of the wives didn't want to come back to the program. But having said that, the outcome, I think there were two big outcomes that came out from the forum, like as you mentioned, was the Pacific Policing Initiative, which is very much needed, not only in Tonga, but also in the rest of the Pacific Island, in the region, having to know the growing increase of transnational drug trafficking coming from America and Asia through our Pacific region to get here to Australia and New Zealand. And having that initiative been announced was a big bonus for the Pacific Island, particularly, like I mentioned before, Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa, which is much really needed. Having said that, the resources that we have, I can say we're still using iPhone 4 and 5 in Tonga. So you can just imagine the downgrade and the much needed upgrade just to battle having drugs washing on our shores, where I'm talking about we need trainings, we need technology such as drone for marine civilians and so much more. And that announcement was almost like a breath of relief for us, but it's still in process, and I know it will take time. But we're hoping things will decrease and have captured a lot and stop the drug trafficking trade through our country. There were, back in the days, I remember in the 90s, I have heard stories of drug routing through or transiting through our shores, but none was left in our country. Now, some of it are being left in our country with the increase of drug-related crimes in Tonga related to this, because some of these drugs are left at home and some are taken to Fiji, to Lice, to handle.
To report on.
Thank you.
The other interesting, well, I can say interesting, which happened in most of Pacific Forum meetings, are the tension, which is, I was so fortunate to have witnessed, and it goes to show, and I do not kid you, Daisy has eyes and ears in the back of his head. It was the tension between leaders having to mention Taiwan in their statement. And this was during the last press conference of the forum, and present in that forum was a senior Chinese representative, and he stormed out furiously out from the conference. I didn't see or even know when Dizzy left the room, but as soon as I found him, he was there all alone with his recorder towards this Chinese representative asking the questions, and all I can see was the Chinese representative talking to Dizzy like this, and I can hear Taiwan mentioned between, and that just goes to show the physicality of tension between the countries, foreign affairs and foreign countries, and these two countries are not involved or have no stance officially in the Pacific Island Forum. And that just goes to show how important the region is to these superpowers around the world, having to have focus and trying to show interest in what we do and what the leaders do and say. At the same time, there's also a raised concern with Tonga, and I'm sure in the rest of the Pacific Island, that we need to keep our stance in the Pacific as unity. We always talk about we're all one family in the ocean, but again, behind that, there's individually, we have that sovereignty to decide who we want to lean towards to. And of course, it all comes down to donors and financial availability given to us, because we are, of course, very poor. And I have to mention, last week, the Australian High Commission in Tonga announced the increase of budget support to our budget for this year was in USD $85 million, which was the biggest we have had so far from a foreign aid donor. It just goes to show the interest and the priority of Australia towards the region, like Tonga.
Now, I want to stay on the PIF because, of course, Solomon Islands will host this year's Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Meeting. We've heard that it can be somewhat of a full contact sport, but Chrissy, what do you think we can expect from Prime Minister Jeremiah Maneli or from the Solomon Islands government as they play host to this year's Leaders Meeting?
Well, look, Tonga has really stepped up since the last PIFs. I've heard a lot of great comments from leaders and people who've attended the last Leaders Summit. Looks like from what I understand, with that interview that I had with Prime Minister Jeremiah Maneli, Solomon Islands is hosting PIFs for the second time. He says the last was in 1992, so it's been more than 2 decades before us hosting. But Prime Minister Maneli is expected to navigate complex geopolitics more diplomatically. All of that I've already mentioned earlier as to why, and we can expect nothing out of the ordinary. He will be striking that balance, because what he tells me is at the very top of what Solomon Islands is going forward with is climate change. He wants to see impacts not only on oceans, but on agriculture, one of the sectors that Solomon Islands, one of the productive sectors that the government is working closely towards addressing for Solomon Islanders. And he also believes that and hopes there'll be tangible benefits that will come out from the PIF's summit in Solomon Islands. Solomon Islands is a country that has a history of successfully hosting big events. We had the Miss Pacific pageant earlier this year. I'm sure some of you can relate. We also hosted the Pacific Games in 2023. So Solomon Islanders, of course, are very they'll be out there with their happy smiles to welcome the leaders and the different Pacific people, our Pacific people who will be there in September. But it's also an important time for Pacific leaders to show their leadership and to provide that leadership in accordance to the 2050 Blue Strategy of the Pacific. But all in all, I'm very mindful. We know island time can really take us away from things, so I'm just mindful of the time that we have here.
Terrific. B, I want to ask you, Australia and Papua New Guinea announced that they will be negotiating a defence treaty. This would be a significant step up in the relationship between the two countries, particularly in that security space. But I wanted to know, how was the news received locally in Papua New Guinea, and what would the community expect from a treaty? Given that past sensitivities over sovereignty derailed previous attempts at reaching that treaty-level status.
So I just needed to find out which treaty was this, but we've had a lot of talk about treaties between the two countries.
Yeah.
I should say that a lot of Papua New Guineans are concerned about definitely security, more specifically our police force, defense force. I think recently we've had 2 Australians being sworn into the force, into the PNG RSP, Royal Police Constabulary, as 2 commissioners. Surprisingly, a lot of people that I spoke to did express the concerns surrounding Australian police officers being sworn into the local police force. I should say it was a reminder of what we had before, ECP, where we had the enhanced cooperation several years back. And so it had to stop, of course, because of the a court directive. And so what has happened was that over the years, our local people have expressed a lot of concern in relation to systems that are in place within the force, recruitment, the lack of police, the lack of attending to very serious cases, the lack of convictions, trust in the judiciary, a lot of arrests, a lot of charges, a lot of very serious crimes over the last couple of months, I should say, especially towards women and girls within the city. And the lack of arrest itself, as I speak, we have had no arrests in relation to 4 female deaths within the capital city. And that in itself is a concern for citizens. And so when we have that partnership, a lot of people are expecting change, a change to be safe again in the city. And so it doesn't matter if it's from Australia or Taiwan or China, or like what my sister said, the pothole is there. Whoever can keep it maintained and make sure that the rain doesn't wash it off again. And if that is a concrete pothole, or making sure that this relationship or this treaty is able to keep me safe, we're welcoming that.
Well said. Fiji has had some political upheaval in its history, including 4 coups since independence, most of them carried out or supported by elements of the military, so staying on defense. But the country has enjoyed a period of stability over the last 2 decades, including 3 elections, the last of which in 2022 resulted in a peaceful political transition from former Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama, who himself came to power in a coup in 2006 and held that office for 16 years. How is the military seen today, particularly its role in society and politics? Lice.
Thank you. I've been working on a particular story around constitutional reforms. I think it's important to come in from that angle when we talk about how people perceive the military now. And in an effort to understand how valuable constitutional reform is to society, I spoke to a youth leader. And she coincidentally is a Fijian youth leader, but also has a role leading Pacific youth. And there was something that she said to me that kind of stuck with me for a little bit and really made me think as a not so young person. She said, there's never been a time in the history of this country since I've been alive when the military has not played a political role. I stopped for a bit and thought long and hard about that. And so I followed up that question with, how does that make you feel? How does that make your constituents feel? how do young people in this country view the military? And she immediately said, with apprehension. And then I stuck on that for a little while. And then she said, Belinda, I'm a learned person, so I will say it. I'll use a very tempered word, but people are frightened. Young people are frightened. They don't know what to expect off of the military. And I think that stems from, and you were kind when you said, we've had a few political upheavals. We probably had more than anyone else in the Pacific. And our leaders tend to be people who have come from the military and taken and risen to the Prime Minister's position after having taken power through military might. And our current constitution, for the first time, gives the military, or at least depending on interpretation, one of the interpretations is that it gives them a specific guardianship role. Guardianship of the Constitution and guardianship of the country. And depending on how you interpret that, if you were a lawyer, it's almost an endorsement of power to do what they think is appropriate when they see what they think is a disruption to society. So it's a source of fear for the young people that I've spoken to. But it's fair to say that in recent years, the military is enjoying a more positive brand, if I can call it that, particularly over the transition of power in the 2022 general elections. There was a period just after the votes were tallied when the parties were in coalition talks, and it wasn't really clear what was going to happen, who was going to collude with who, and some of the now previous members of government called on the military to do something, take action, and the military didn't, and actually made statements around it not being their role, and that they would wait on the people's will, which they did. But then fast forward 2-3 months, and you hear the military making statements, the head of the military making statements around, constitutional power and around what's appropriate for the newly elected government to do or not do. And so again, that inspired fear. When we interviewed people around that time, there was a lot of anxiety in the public. There was a lot of, there's still sometimes a lot of fresh memory around 87, 2000 again. See, sometimes I forget whether it was twice in 87 or twice in 2000, but definitely 2006. People remember what it's like when the military decides it's their role now to come in and do something. Having said that, when you speak with the leaders of government now, when you speak with the Prime Minister, he's very careful. His words are quite well chosen. His ministers of defense, and we've had 2 in the last 2.5 years since they've been in power, they do the same. It's almost as if, and this is commentary from people too, it's almost as if they are pussyfooting around this exceptional role that the military currently has under our constitution. However, there is not a family in Fiji that does not have links to soldiers. So despite the role that elements of the military, as you put it so nicely, have had in our political upheavals, we all have a soldier in our families. So Fijian soldiers enjoy a very positive brand position in the international peacekeeping market. Since the late 70s, we have more soldiers than we know what to do with, but the United Nations always has...
We need a few in Australia.
We send some your way sometimes. They are very well-regarded peacekeepers in the Middle East. There is not a hot spot in the world since the 80s that you could not have found a Fijian soldier or a Fijian general doing very good work. So there's a lot of pride associated with that because, we were warriors at one stage, cannibals even. So there's still quite a lot of that warrior spirit. It doesn't come, though, when we're playing Super Rugby against you. But we're working on that. So that warrior spirit translates into the way we keep peace in these troubled spots around the world. So, we don't hate the military, But every now and again, we fear the military. The way the military and members of the military have been portrayed in the media, have been photographed doing the things that they have done, for example, is still pretty fresh in a lot of Fijians' mind. In the last 6 months or so, when constitutional reform has been a very important event, I should say, in Fiji, the military have, to their credit, not made very many, if any, statements around what their role should be. And so there is a newfound freedom that people have now to make commentary, to give their opinion, or even legal analysis around what they think the role of the military should be. But we're right now hot in the middle of our constitutional reform, or not, depending on where you stand. It looks like there's a deadlock. It looks like there might be a chance of reforming the Constitution, but very high on the agenda, whichever side of the reform conversation you're on, very high on the agenda is addressing that. What is the role of the military in society, and should the Constitution be wording that power as it currently does?
Now, folks, that concludes the formal part of our panel. And I'd like to throw to the audience, I think our producer is going to kill me, but they'd be all right if I didn't. I'd like to throw to the floor for questions from the audience. I think we can squeeze in a couple. We've got a gentleman at the front. Rachel will be coming with a microphone. These two here in front, and Jemima.
Thank you. I'm Qazi, retired from Bangladesh Navy. I start from the porthole. So the question is, who created this porthole in Pacific Island? So I'm going to tell a short statement, and if I am wrong, then correct me. This porthole is created for over a period. Since the Trump 1-0 position, American Indo-Pacific strategy, considered Indo-Pacific strategy, but they have been preoccupied with China to contain Taiwan, Afghanistan, and then many other issues, and then lastly the COVID. Similarly, they have been overlooked, and then Biden administration came, and then COVID came, and then all on a sudden, oh my God, China has occupied all the island. They have created lots of 23 or 30 countries have made a security pact with China. And lastly, the Solomon Island in 20th. So everybody has realized what happened. Even the Biden administration admitted that, yes, we had a lack of communication.
Could I ask you to
Island,
answer the question, sir?
And then the question is, whose failure is that? Is it the Australian failure, American failure? And now we are very conscious about the security. So where was the failure?
The potholes?
So the question is, whose failure was?
Who created the potholes? Okay, I'm getting the signal from everyone to answer this. If you're asking us to correct your statement, I'm sorry, we're not in the business of doing that. We are in the business of communicating your statement. However, I can say this: the people of the Pacific, they're not in the business of going into history around why the problems we have currently exist. They're living in the reality of those problems. Even domestically, when politicians try to attribute some of the difficulties that we're facing, the challenges that we have to a particular government, no one cares anymore. The reality is we are a region that have suffered from economic shocks like never before. We're a region whose public health infrastructure was exposed for its vulnerabilities by COVID like never before. And now we're struggling with problems that are someone else's, but we're having to deal with it through the already very scarce resources that we have. And I'm sorry, we kept using potholes as an analogy, but like my sisters have said, in the Pacific, we don't care too much about how the problems came to be, because a lot of the problems we face, the chief amongst them being climate change, wasn't ours, wasn't caused by us, but we're living it. All we're interested in doing is uniting as a region working with all of the people who want to work with us in the region and not taking sides on their own domestic issues and their own political issues because we just want to get the work done. That's the strong voice coming out from the people that we speak to in the Pacific. I hope that answers that.
And I think we can do one more. Jemima, please.
Yes, thank you for your inspiring work and also for your wise and nuanced thoughts tonight. As fine journalists, you will inevitably run into problems with your own governments. That's the job of a journalist. As women in current times, we're finding that abuse online is huge. So how big are the problems you face in just doing your job? Where do you turn for support? And is there any kind of support that you would like that isn't available to you at the moment?
Take it away, Lice.
A few people will owe me after this.
Oh, yes. According to Nick, having all women in this team wasn't intentional. It just also goes to show back in Tonga and anywhere else in the region, there are more interest from women in media than it is in men. I think from my own experience, I have more benefit reporting as an ABC reporter than as a local journalist. I can ask the questions independently to the previous government, Prime Minister, or the current government, Prime Minister. That's the benefit of having to be reporting for ABC. The downside of it is being bullied online, like as you mentioned, and we all experience it. The latest one will be our sister from Vanuatu, which just happened last week. How to deal with it? Because we're all Pacific Islanders, we may face bullying differently, but the language or the common grounds are there. We come together and show support, just as we are in one country. We don't want to feel alone in our own individual country. So we have our own support system amongst ourselves first. And then we have a whole Pacific team in ABC that also reach out to us. And we are always fortunate and honored that we have a boss, which is Matt and Nick, that is our voices here in Australia and everywhere else around the ABC platforms. So they're taking care of all the political businesses here in Australia while we are handling it back at home, which they have taken that out from us, that stress or that workload or having to worry about what's happening here in Australia, while we try to concentrate and build each other amongst us in our own language, whether if it's through video call, late at night. We start off with sometimes gossiping and swearing before we actually, we are our own therapy amongst ourselves. You're asking about our well-being. We take care of ourselves, and the bonus to it is we speak one language when it comes to, let's say, when we're awarded or even when we're down, we all speak one language together, which is women in media and having the passion to work, whether if it's against our government or reporting positive development about our government. The benefit is having to report it according to how we, the Pacific Island women, report it from each of our individual government.
If I can just add to that, the Pacific Islands has more than double the global average of gender-based violence rates in the world. In Fiji, and I know it's the same for Papua New Guinea and a few other Melanesian countries, 1 in every 2 women you will meet will have faced some form of violence that is specific to their gender, and that violence continues onto the online spaces as well. It's an area of gender-based violence that is not very well researched, so there's quite a lot of call for there to be more research in the area. So the women of the Pacific, they face a lot of violence. Technology facilitated gender-based violence is now quite an emerging issue that there's a lot of investment in the area right now. It's a pet project of some of the members of our team as well. As journalists, we join a group of women in the public eye who just by very nature of the work we do are already different. We're a hugely patriarchal region, and so sometimes the values of patriarchy can make it so that if we're a woman on TV a lot, in these public media spaces a lot, that's already quite different, unheard of, already challenging the systems. So just by default, we already get some comments. Just even the most mundane of stories can attract nasty comments. And my favorite is the body shaming ones. And we like to remind people, we're in the Pacific, big is beautiful here. Some of it is a lot worse. We try to, as Marian pointed out, support each other every day. But something that we enjoy as members of the ABC, I was going to say family, but we really should stop using that word. As members of this wonderful team at the ABC, we have access to services and facilities that other members of the ABC have access to. And I wanted to speak on that particularly because I've had to access some of that, and it's professional psychosocial services. You get into this industry being told, grow a thick skin. They will call you this, they will do this, they will issue death threats, they will issue threats of sexual violence. We get that quite regularly, several times a month sometimes. And you just have to be tough because that's the job. We're learning in the last 2-3 years that that isn't the job, that you don't have to be tough and that you don't have to put up with violence that occurs to you online. And so thankfully, Nick and Matt and everyone else at the ABC seem to be very aware of some of the difficulties that we face. So we try never to read the comments. So if you're a student journalist, don't read the comments. Don't even have a social media account if you can, really. I've been struggling to reduce mine from 3,000 to 100, so good luck, don't do it.
Can I just add on a political perspective?
Yeah, we're heaps over time, please.
Island time.
So as I was saying, there is psychosocial support at the ABC. Our colleagues back in our countries, they don't enjoy not even a quarter of that. So they struggle through it daily. Some of them change jobs, some have changed countries to get away from that violence. But it's definitely an emerging issue for media in the Pacific.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Thank you, Jemima.
Well, folks, you can see what an impressive lineup that the ABC has working in our region. Please join me in thanking our panelists tonight, Chrisnrita, Aumanu-Leong, Belinda, Kora, Marian Kupu, and Lice Movono.